Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Tech Can't Save Us podcast brought to you by Literal Humans. As always, I am Paul David, founder and CEO of Literal Humans, and your host. And I'm joined today by Richard Savoie, founder and CEO of Adiona. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Do you prefer Rich? Is that
Yeah,
Richard?
I do go by Rich. Yep.
Okay, I'll stick with Rich then. Today, we're going to talk about reinventing urban delivery through AI route optimization. And I'm going to jump into a very long and well-deserved introduction here. Adiona is an award-winning AI-powered delivery optimization platform that's reinventing how cities move goods. Rich is a patent-holding engineer and executive who spent his career at the intersection of research and development, sustainability, and logistics. Adiona's platform powers millions of deliveries globally for some of the world's biggest brands, including some small brands you might have heard of, Coca-Cola, Amazon, Australia Post, and Marley Spoon, and delivers results up to 87% faster, 90% more accurate, and 50% cheaper than traditional route optimization systems. Rich has also been quoted in publications like Triple E, CNN, and the Boston Business Journal, and has co-founded multiple tech spinouts and engineering communities. Welcome to the pod, Rich.
Thanks, Paul. That was a very generous intro. Far too generous. You can definitely call me Rich. That was very friendly. Thank you.
You bet, you bet, you bet. Well, it's well earned. So what we like to do here is just kind of set the scene for our audience. Talk to us about last mile delivery as one of the biggest challenges facing cities today. We know that urban populations are growing, that delivery volumes are exploding, and cities are more congested than ever. I live in London. You don't need to tell me about that. So where are the biggest sort of cracks in today's logistics systems, and what makes last mile delivery specifically so expensive and inefficient for retailers and carriers?
Well, you bring up a great point that urban populations are growing. And I just saw in the news last week that Jakarta, Indonesia, has now taken over from Tokyo as the world's largest city. 45 million people in one urban area. It's absolutely enormous metropolitan area. And when we talk about last mile delivery as the more complex and more expensive and more emissions intense piece of the supply chain, that I try to help people visualize this by just looking around the room that they're in. Or if they're in their car, look around the car and find an item that you bought. And, that item is made of things that have been, dug out of the ground, cut down from trees, sourced as raw materials. Lots and lots of pieces then have to be shipped around, different areas to come together in a manufacturing facility. But they can all be batched together, right? Screws, planks of wood, whatever it is, they get batched together, they get sent to this manufacturing facility, and then that goes to somewhere else, like a distribution center. And then that last bit where it has to go from the distribution center, like an Amazon warehouse, to either a store, like a retail store, a Walmart or something like that, or to your house, you don't get that effect of batching anymore, right? Now there's far more individualistic items that need to come on their own. And that's what makes it so expensive and so intensive and complicated. And because of that, it's a much more difficult problem to solve for software and AI.
So there's a lot of sort of confounding pressures like coming from many different directions here, and particularly around sustainability. So EV adoption, one of our biggest clients works in the EV space in America, working on training thousands of EV technicians. So something we know and love. Emissions targets, these ULEZs, these urban low emission zones like we have here in London. And a lot of these trends reshaping modern delivery networks. You mentioned AI and some of the, other technological variables, but what did these, last mile delivery systems need to look like in order to, deliver on the modern promise of, speedy delivery, but also sustainability at the same time?
Well, let's talk about sustainability because that's a great question. And we were founded really with the mission and the North Star of reducing emissions in logistics. There's a lot of inefficiency, there's a lot of waste, and everybody knows that in this industry, but yet it's still so difficult to mitigate and difficult to reduce. And the urgency is increasing. So for people that don't know, transport generally is the second largest emitting sector in the world, right behind power generation. And because the grids are being decarbonized very quickly and we're moving to renewable energy across the world in a lot of markets, transport is predicted to be the highest single emitting industry by 2030, and that's not that far away. Now, if you split that up between commercial and passenger transport, it's about half and half. And if you look at road transport, it's about 80%. So people talk about flights, they talk about sea cargo, but they talk about rail, but the vast majority of the emissions, 80%, come from road transport. Now,
Wow.
that road transport piece, when you split it between commercial and passenger, it's a relatively straightforward thing to swap your diesel or gasoline or petrol car for an electric car. It's less complicated because you only have to deal with the one vehicle, right? You have to deal with charging and wherever you're going to charge, all the factors. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that it's easier than when you are a commercial operator with 100 vehicles or 10,000 vehicles in the case of like a PepsiCo or a Walmart. You know, the complexity of now at scale electrifying that fleet is far more complicated. And yet there's still a lot of pressure. Like you said, governments are taking action. Regulatory bodies are making emissions mandatory to report. So in the UK and in Australia and in Europe, a lot of places, a lot of countries, you have to report your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So you're on the hook, and you might be paying penalties if you misreport those. And likewise, they're enacting things like low emission zones, like you have in London, and they're proposing one for New York, and there's some in cities all over the world. But, you know, a friend of mine just got back from Shanghai, and he said it was almost creepy how silent the streets are now because the EV adoption in China is so dramatic. 60% of new commercial vehicles sold are electric. So you got this amazing transformation that you're seeing take shape all around the world, but it requires new solutions to manage it because EVs run differently than diesel or petrol vehicles, internal combustion vehicles. They just have a totally different set of parameters. And anybody who owns an EV knows that there's such a dramatic difference between when you're running it at a hot day or versus a cold day, or if it's fully loaded and you've got like your car full of your entire family and loaded down to go on holiday versus just you commuting to work, the range difference is enormous. Whereas that
Yeah.
range it's far more subtle in a gas powered car. So these are the things that software and AI are helping to merge into the conversation to say, well, we're actually creating a framework for electrification, low emissions vehicles, and then for the future, a network that supports autonomous vehicles as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the EV space. Or as I mentioned, one of our clients, or they're called Smarter Help, working in the EV training and workforce development space, and just learning about the incredible infrastructure challenges around EVs. It's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to get an electric car and plug it into the charger, but the battery systems and the repairs and kind of the infrastructure that goes with that is it's been fascinating learning about that. And then the people challenge, which we're trying to work with Smarter Help on solving, is we need tens of thousands of new electricians, millions of new technicians, I should say, who focus on EVs, who they're not trained up on this yet. So we're trying to push their curriculum into schools and workforce development organizations and career and technical schools. So yeah, there's such an interesting infrastructure, but also people challenge with this kind of work as well. Want to take us into Adiona's products. So this is a chance for you to really explain to our audience, how Adiona's AI engine, helps fleets deliver faster, cheaper, and more sustainably. If you can kind of walk us through what a company actually gets when they use Adiona, and what your core technology is actually solving.
That's a Thank you for asking that. And it's really simple when you break it down to its basic level. Delivery orders are coming in from all sorts of places to the companies that do the deliveries. We call them carriers. And oftentimes, a brand or a company will have their own fleet, or they'll be using a third-party logistics company, an outsourced fleet. Regardless, they're getting all these orders all the time. And so they can't predict necessarily when those orders are going to come in. They all flow through into our system. We then use our algorithms and our AI to then create the optimal set of orders for all their delivery vehicles. So at the end of the day, they've got a really complex challenge to solve that used to be done by humans sitting in a dispatch center with maps on the wall and Excel sheets and things like that. We're automating that process and making it way more efficient than a human could ever achieve with their own brain. And if you think about it from a London context, right, like the black cab drivers in London, if you even want to drive a black cab, you got to memorize the entire city because it's so complicated. And the key to
The knowledge they call it, right?
yeah, the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
So, not everybody can do that, especially in any arbitrary city around the world. So we're doing that for them. They get these beautiful, efficient delivery routes. But then the next layer up is that we're taking all of that historical data that flows through the system, and then we can use it in lots of different interesting ways. The primary way is simply providing a digital twin environment. So Imagine, if you will, you are a large retailer and you've got your own delivery network and you're using Adiona to create all these delivery routes. Well, that's cool. But your delivery needs and demands are very different in the winter than they are in the summer. And they're different at peak time, Black Friday, whatever, holiday season than they are in the off season. They're constantly changing. And so what we provide is this insights engine and simulation engine that allows them to then simulate different scenarios and be prepared for them. How many contractor drivers am I going to need at holiday season, and where should they be based out of? Which distribution centers? Or I'm about to, I'm a food distributor and I just won a massive new contract with, I'm going to be delivering to a whole new chain of grocery stores. Well, how the heck am I going to do it? How many vehicles do I need and where should I put them? And do I need to build new warehouses? And so taking that blend of the historical insights and applying it to predictions for the future in an AI enabled digital twin environment allows them to achieve that predictive stability, day to day stability, and then also to just save a lot of money and a lot of emissions to do the same amount of work. And we get really happy when we see those types of results.
Yeah. We'd love to understand your, claim is achieving dramatic gains in accuracy, speed, and cost when compared to traditional routing systems. Is it just the digital twins or the modeling that they can do with the digital twin? But what else does the platform do to help them achieve these gains specifically?
Yeah, it's really about applying really specific insights for their network and using AI to then model them. So I'll give you an example. We worked with a company that does medical deliveries, right? And one of their challenges was that in inclement weather, like snowstorms in the northern hemisphere and stuff, um, they had a service level that they have to deliver urgent stuff within a certain amount of time. And so they focus all the business on making sure that they meet those contract goals. But then they've got all these other disruptions happening on the roads. Roads are closing, things are chaotic. How do you then prioritize the next deliveries? And the thing that AI can do at scale that humans can't is to make fast calculations to prioritize revenue and profit margin. So rather than just saying, I want to maximize the amount of inventory that I'm delivering today and get as much of it as I can, I'm going to say, actually, I want the AI agency to be dynamically looking for, if I deliver this product, will that result in higher revenue and profit than this other product? And if it's all the same on a disrupted day, those are the decisions that will actually make really tangible improvements in your performance at scale. Now imagine doing that every day as well. So new things are coming in, and you can price optimize, and you can not only optimize your network, but it helps you to optimize the rest of the business. So you really do get this powerful way of reducing cost, reducing emissions, but also unlocking opportunities to grow and to scale.
Really interesting. Yeah, I want to push us to talk about challenges and opportunities here, and we know that logistics, it's an industry that's kind of full of legacy software. There's a lot of manual processes and sort of rigid systems, things like that. Would love to understand the barriers that you run into most often when working with enterprise fleets, and just thinking about all the different changes that we're seeing in terms of regulation, micromobility, automation. Kind of paint a picture for our audience of, look, these are the challenges, but here's what the future of fleet optimization really looks like, and give us kind of both sides if you can.
Yeah, I love that. Well, when you work with big enterprise, it's always challenging, but that's changed a lot in the even the last 10, 15 years, because this access to information, and now with AI and LLMs, this, instant access to deep research has absolutely changed the way that enterprises look for solutions. And it's leveled the playing field in some ways, which is great for smaller companies like us, because it means that we actually get more of a fair shake, versus the big boys. But at the same time, it creates more challenges because you need more consensus. If everybody's holding the keys to the same information, they're all going to have different opinions, and you need to have someone that's willing to take leadership role in that, which is always tricky in big enterprise. So how that plays out as well is there's complex systems. And in our market, in this kind of delivery logistics vertical, there's lots of software companies, but we have taken a very specific focus on big enterprise to create API integration solutions rather than an end-to-end platform. So everybody knows SAP, right? You can absolutely do a lot of what we do in SAP, but you're going to be paying SAP prices, and that's quite the investment. You're going to get a whole lot more for it as well, right? It's not like we're competing with them directly. But you get the point where we can integrate into the SAP ecosystem rather than trying to replace chunks of it and augment all of these different transportation management softwares and even to your, you mentioned manual processes as well. There's a lot of companies that are still doing things very manually. They even have software that they could be using better, but they're still doing things manually. There's lots of reasons that that happens. I think another thing that we try to do is create a journey. We create a story. This is where you are today. This is where you want to get to. But what's the story? What are the steps that we're going to take, the adventure that we're going to go on together to achieve that? Because if you try to pretend like AI is a silver bullet that's just going to solve all of their problems, I think the shine has worn off of that story. Everybody knows that that's not the case, and especially with complex enterprise. So, you've got operational constraints, you've got heaps of different types of software, you've got psychological barriers in the organization of people that maybe feel threatened by automation. And let me just touch on that too, because we didn't talk about it in the kind of problem statement. But manufacturing in the U.S., for example, has 400,000 unfilled jobs that have been posted for over 6 months. There's a massive crunch in labor force for supply chain and logistics. So this is one of those industries that we have to automate. We have no choice but to automate. And so that's still a conversation we have to have, though, because at the individual level, I don't want my job to be replaced tomorrow by some bot, but it doesn't need to be. I think that's not the case. That's not what we see actually happening in the real world. These big enterprises have plenty of other problems that they can deploy their people to once they automate out these kinds of things. So to answer your question, back to that, the psychological barriers in that organization as well have to play out. And so I think these are the things that when you combine them together, they're challenges, but it's also an opportunity because it creates a really clear picture. If you can address all of those issues, you can create a really clear picture for transformation. And the transformation piece is often the hardest one.
Yeah. We'd be remiss if we didn't ask you a question about kind of growth strategy. We're a growth strategy consultancy. That's what we do. Would love to understand how you're thinking about growth, how you've gotten to the point that you are. Talk to us about, fundraising. Talk to us about your buyer. Like when you think logistics, I think a guy with a clipboard, in a truck or something like that, and want to understand who you're selling to, who your buyers are, and just kind of what your roadmap for growth looks like. And also balancing that obviously with, sustainability, which is a key feature for you all.
Well, I guess for your audience too, maybe they'd be interested in just a little bit of the story, like the growth story so far, right? Because I think hearing those types of things and all the failures along with the successes will inform how people approach it themselves. So anyway, we started with a very different problem statement. We were actually looking at commuting, how people commute to work and things like that. And my background, as you kind of alluded to in the intro, is electrical engineering and medical devices. So I really don't have any kind of supply chain or logistics background. So we were looking at this mobility question around commuting and could we build some solutions for that. We did spend about a year and a half working on that. And it was very difficult. We couldn't raise money. We couldn't get funding, especially here in Australia, where it's just a tougher market generally to raise funding for startups. And it was kind of dying. It was kind of failing. And then through old-fashioned hustle and networking and meeting a lot of people, having a lot of coffees, we got an introduction to one of the Coca-Cola bottlers down in this part of the world. We ended up building, well, they basically said, we like conceptually what you're talking about. We think you guys are pretty clever, but we can't use what you're trying to sell us. But we have this other massive problem with one of our delivery fleets. Could you adapt what you're doing to that? And we said, well, we've got nothing else really going for us right now, so we'll give it a try. And that was basically the first version of our product. My co-founder is a PhD in optimization science and computer science. So it was quite the natural fit. Anyway, that catalyzed our initial fundraise. Basically, off the back of that project, we were able to raise a pre-seed round from a VC in the US and match it with some money here in Australia. And then basically we've had to multiple decision points where we had to decide, well, what's the best growth track for us? Are we going to really double down on VC and go back to our current VC and others and do it? And I definitely spent lots of time talking to many VCs about that. But in the end, I I think that they would have pushed us in a different direction. It would have been much more of a platform play, horizontal play, and they would have been looking to me for more revenue metrics than sustainability metrics, which are really core to our mission. And that's why we focus on things that can be consolidated heavily and will therefore have an outsized environmental, emissions reduction impact. But if you start focusing on things like the DoorDash and Instacart and Uber Eats type world of transport, yeah, you can make money in optimizing that, but it doesn't really turn the needle on emissions reduction. So anyway, that's another reason why VC wasn't really a match for us. And we decided to we got some grants, which was great, non-dilutive. And then we did match that with some other private equity, but like, friendly debt-based financing. And we're looking at that for the future. So we've got a couple of grant applications because of the emissions reduction impact that we do, and also the AI forward nature of our R&D and the protectability of it. So we're looking at a couple of good grant opportunities for there that will probably match with debt, because for those who aren't looking at it or aren't aware of it right now, there's never been a better market for startups, technology companies in the debt markets instead
Yeah.
of VC.
Yeah, we've taken on some debt financing ourselves. We're fans of it. And your point about it being friendly, like, we work with a outfit called Creative Growth Finance, and they're focused on creative industries, and that's sort of, part of what we do. And having that friendly sort of advisor who's also an investor, I think is really helpful for a lot of startups. And as you said, non-dilutive, which is very, very important. Would love to hear a bit more too. Like, talk to us about your buyer. Like, who's your buyer, sort of on the customer side? Who are the person or people? I imagine you're doing some bit of like account-based, selling and account-based marketing. Love to understand who that human is. That's one thing we focus on. Even if you're doing B2B, there's still a person there that's, you need to convince and cajole and things like that.
Yeah.
And talk to us about your buying cycle. Like, what are you doing to sort of accelerate and sort of improve that buying cycle as well?
Yep, those are the little literal humans that we have to interact with and that we love too. And it's really interesting because our buyers typically are in the operational side of the business, but it can be driven from anywhere, from the CEO and CFO, um, down to like dispatchers and operators who just try the software, realize the efficiency gain, and then they sell it up the chain for us. And so I've never had the same type of buying cycle twice, shall we say. It's always a bit different. The ingress point is always different, and the internal advocate is often different, which is just confounding and frustrating sometimes. It can actually be really painful, especially when you're trying to explain to a potential investor or something, like what's your growth strategy for sales? And you go, well, we're still trying to figure out some patterns here because there aren't a lot. But some of the patterns we have seen, and again, at enterprise and with the current state of the market, and I guess the state of scrutiny in software solutions, is you have to prove it. You have to prove it early. And the faster you can prove that it'll work for them, even though you've got the logos of their competitors and their friends and whatever, they still won't believe that it's going to work for them until you show it to them with their own data. So, I encourage anybody in enterprise space is, figure out the fastest way to turning around a super boutique customized demo to your client, and then let them sell that around internally. Convince the person that you did it that it's just going to be absolutely transformative, and then give them the tools to shop that around internally. I think that's the highest likelihood of success. The other thing too is, and then, from a growth perspective, we've been thinking a lot about this. Our customers gossip about us constantly to each other. They're back channeling and talking about us. And that's where most of our leads come from, is people
Right.
call me and say, I was talking to your other customer and we were having a similar problem. Let's talk. It's far more effective than
Yeah.
most of the other type of outbound ABM stuff that we've done. So, but then how do you bottle that? How do you bottle that magic? It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, first is like you have a good product, second, you treat your customers really well, you over index on client service. And then a third, we're always thinking about this balance between sort of brand building activities and activation. A lot of people would say like growth marketing, growth hacking or something like that, but, and kind of generally coming down on this 60-40, brand building, versus activation. And I think in tech these days, it's very, very popular to sort of focus on the activation and the how can we growth hack things and stuff like that. But When you really look at the data and like sort of the marketing methodology, it's like, yeah, we should probably be over-indexing a little bit for brand because that's going to facilitate those conversations, among your customers of, oh, we really like that brand because of the product or, the way they treat us or things like that and how they stand out more so than I saw an ad. Like they're not talking about your paid ads. You know what I mean? That
Well, and Paul, honestly, I really wish I'd learned more of that from people like you in the early days, because coming from an engineering background, I just didn't have any real appreciation for marketing.
hmm
And now I have an enormous appreciation for it, especially, learning all the things I've learned from our CMO and how that plays out at scale, like, just the presence on socials to keep your brand in a high
yeah,
quality state of play in front of people's eyeballs and providing thought leadership and stuff. I never would have ever considered any of that, but it is
right.
so effective. It
Yeah.
really matters.
Share of
But
voice. This is really important. It's about like being present when they are ready to make that buying decision. I think people over marketers, I'll be the first to say this, they sort of sometimes overestimate how much we can actually persuade people. I mean, if they're not ready to
right.
buy, they're not ready to buy, if they've got incumbent, so I think it's just like being present, being consistent, showing up with your brand and being top of mind.
But you spoke about sales cycle, right? So, really interesting. You also need to be able to survive. And that's where financing
Yeah.
is obviously really important and things like that. You need to be able to just survive the cycle. So,
Yeah.
an example is that initial deal I told you about with the Coke bottler. When we came out of the other side of the initial engagement, they basically told us, well, that this has been great. Thanks for showing us what you can do, but we don't have an ERP system that can integrate this kind of technology.
hmm
So
hmm
they went back and used the work with us as a business case to replace their ERP, but it took them 3 years.
Right.
So how are we going to survive for 3 years? While we survived, and grew in 3 years, and then they came back 3 years later.
hmm
But that's a 3 year sales cycle,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to willingly accept that as a possibility. But at the end of the day, we've multiple times now we've met clients, had some calls, just gotten to know each other, and then they go away, and it's not the right time, and they come back 3 years later.
Yeah, it varies from sector to sector, but when you work in a space like yours where you have a very sort of high consideration, sales cycle as we like to call it, in other words, long, those brand building activities become even more important. So maybe it's not 60-40 towards brand building, maybe it's 70-30 and just like being consistent because no amount of email nurture sequences or paid ads or retargeting are going to push that person, to make that deal faster, most likely. Right. So
Yeah,
just staying present, staying consistent, surviving, as you said. And then when they're ready, they'll probably choose you because you've invested in your brand. So
you got it.
it's a long burn, but, it benefits, growth consultancies like us, but here we are.
It tests people's patience, that's for sure.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. We'd love to just dig in one more question, just kind of about you, so we can get to know you a bit better, Rich, and then we'll jump into the quick fire questions. You got this incredible background. You've led engineering teams, designed medical devices, run research and development programs. Now you lead an AI logistics company. Built this 6,000 member engineering community. Would love to understand, how these experiences have influenced your leadership style and your problem solving mindset. I mean, what lessons you've kind of carried across these different worlds that you've occupied.
Wow, I mean, it's such a big topic, but I think it's investment in the people and surrounding yourself with the best people is the most important thing that you can do when you're shaping teams, building teams, trying to build great products, and trying to build an organization. I think there's certainly a lot to be said for culture and making sure that you're fostering the right culture in your organization. There's so many mistakes that people do and have because I think the root cause is they assume that other people will be motivated and or think like they do. And that's just not the case. We have a wonderful diversity of the way that people think. And I remember, once telling my boss that he didn't need to convince me anymore. I will just do what he says, because I believe in him and I trust him. And so people can really, I think, skip a lot of steps in your early career as well, in just appreciating that people think differently, and if you can empathize with them and learn how to communicate with them in a really transparent way, then you can get a lot farther together.
Absolutely. Would love to jump into the quick fire questions. So these are just, fun slightly more personal-ish questions for our audience to get to know you. So first thought that comes to mind, you've had a little preview of them, and just a quick sentence of explanation. All right. First things first, you're busy with Adiona, but if you could found another tech startup, what would it be and why?
I would go back to medical devices. I think there's actually this amazing opportunity to merge AI and hardware.
Wow.
And that's something that I don't have the opportunity to do right now. The other thing that's really exciting that we're kind of going towards in our company, we're about to announce a partnership, is quantum. So quantum
Whoa.
computing is one of the panaceas for optimization, but it's also
Hmm.
something that I was doing when I was back in uni 25 years ago. So
Wow.
that I was really interested in. So yeah, quantum
Very,
AI medical devices.
wow.
That's my answer.
Very cool. There's layers to that we don't have time to unpeel,
Yeah,
but
I'm
but
keeping it
yeah.
real simple, right?
No, exactly. Sort of double-sided question here. What tech invention right now makes you the most excited, and what makes you the most concerned?
I think AI and the potential for AGI is super exciting and super concerning. For I think most people who are following it are pretty aware of the risks, but also the opportunity when you start to look at the convergence of AI with robotics, and that's really exciting to me because it's just really cool opportunities beyond robots that just do jujitsu and beat people up. I mean, the ability to transform the world that we live in for the better, especially for the most vulnerable. It's unreal, the opportunity there.
Absolutely. Who's a literal human, small L, small H, who's been integral to your career journey? You want to shout out right now?
I always have to shout out my man, Gary Searle. He was a manager. He was 2 levels above me at one of my first job out of uni. And just, I still ask myself, what would Gary do
Hmm.
when I'm confounded with things? He's been like a moral and professional guidepost, I think, for a long time. So, hey, Gary.
Nice. WWGD. What would Gary do? Nice. Should get like a little bracelet or something like that. I'm sure Gary would love it.
He would.
What's an inspirational quote? It could be from Gary or otherwise, that stuck with you throughout your journey in tech.
There's one that I still repeat quite often that I love, which is just, especially since I had children, now I understand it when I probably didn't before, but it's never take advice too seriously from anybody with less than 3 businesses. I get lots of business advice all the time, but it's just like kids, man. They're all different. And the advice
Yeah.
that you apply, this from, working with so
Yeah.
many different companies, you just can't apply a carbon cut formula. So
Hmm.
yeah, don't trust anybody's advice unless they have at least 3 successful businesses.
That's hilarious. Yeah. It's funny. I find myself in a lot of sort of business owner networks, and I think about that a lot. And like sometimes I feel like the advice I get in those networks is just like it accelerates me. It's like a cheat code. I'm just like an hour with these people is more than any business school class, or you know what I mean. It's just yeah. There's no substitute for experience largely.
And you
So
know it
yeah.
when you find those people compared to the other
Hmm.
people who may be louder, but their advice isn't necessarily as applicable to you. But when you meet those people that can synthesize that type of advice, man, it's pretty mind blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, and then you're like kicking yourself for, in the past, like having taken advice or the weight you put on advice from folks who maybe shouldn't have been given that advice.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Rich, it's been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time. We figured out the Australia London time zone switch. It just didn't a late one for you, early one for me. But what I liked about this conversation, it highlights the complexity of modern logistics and fleet optimization, and how there's a massive opportunity to rethink it, and you're doing it. I think Adiona shows how AI can make delivery networks faster, greener, more resilient at a time when cities desperately need better ways to move goods and move people as well. So, Rich, thank you for joining us. Please let our listeners know where they can learn more about Adiona and the great work that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Paul. And I've really enjoyed the conversation too. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I think that's always the best place to find me these days. So just search for Rich Savoie on LinkedIn, Adiona, and would love to engage with the audience and talk about logistics, but also all the other many, many things that we talked about, Paul. The world's a big place. So why stop at logistics? We can talk about anything.
Yeah.
Quantum medical devices
I was just gonna
included.
say, we're gonna have you back, and you're gonna have to explain. We've had a couple, one or two episodes on quantum. I don't think we totally get it yet, but we're working on it. But yeah. Well, thanks, Rich, and thanks everybody for listening. This has been another great episode of Tech Can Save Us podcast, brought to you by Literal Humans. I've been joined today by the great Rich Savoie, founder and CEO of Adiona. We were talking about reinventing urban delivery through AI route optimization. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks, Rich. And for our listeners, please, y'all, give us a review, give us a 5-star rating. It helps us bring more great guests like Rich Savoie onto the Tech Can't Save Us podcast. Thanks, everybody.